The Associated Press went and reported that we said the Holocaust was exaggerated, which was a blatant lie. Our statements was, you can hear it on our site, and you can read it. And we spoke at the opening of the session, right after the foreign minister. At the closing of the session, when the president was there, we kept on reiterating that it's clear that millions of Jews were killed. My grandparents were killed in Auschwitz. The rabbi sitting over there was in a bunker in Hungary, sitting past me, you can see. It was in a bunker. His mother was killed in Hungary, in Budapest. We all lived the Holocaust. And I went there and I said, I'm a representative of the people who died in the Holocaust. And they died because they were Jewish, because they upheld God's teaching. To them, metaphorically speaking, to dig them up, to rebel against God, to oppress other people, that's a second tragedy, a second Holocaust. So use them to do against God's will. He said, therefore we're here to let the world know that doing to the Palestinians, oppressing them, expelling them, all in the name of God, it's false, it's illegitimate, it's a scandal, it's criminal, it's against the teachings of the Torah. And BBC reported it properly, Reuters, all the Arab papers, I have the quotes, I have everything here. And Associated Press mysteriously reported it was all over the Zionist papers. All of a sudden the Zionist papers didn't read anything in BBC, in Reuters, and all the newspapers, the world papers, and what the even what the official statement of the Iranian sites they didn't write, which they had written about us. What they wrote was, we said it was exaggerated, a blatant lie. It took me 2 weeks after I came back to New York to fight with them that they should eventually make a retraction. They kept on saying it's a holiday now in Iran. We can't find our reporter in Iran. It was in Persian. He says it was another source. Eventually they made a full retraction, which we have here. In December 15th, a story about an Iranian-sponsored conference on the Holocaust, the Associated Press erroneously attributed a claim that the number of Jews killed in that was exaggerated. Rabbi Yisrael David Weiss, who attended the conference, denied making such a statement and said the claim does not reflect his position. He opposed the state of Israel. The story should have also cited Iranian news reports, and he writes there are two versions going out. The members under New York City are asked to use the following story. But who used it? Not one Zionist paper. They totally ignored it. Now, if BBC would have written that I said it was exaggerated, or one slight against anything that you could think of our religion, God's will, anything scandalous, they would have read BBC. They would have known about it. But whenever they see anything that's good, for instance, we met with the president for an hour and a half. He gave us this time. He had elections the next day for his sister. It was three types of elections. He sat with us, and they put out an official statement from the Iranian, from the news, from the official government statement, and it was in the Iranian papers and other papers, and they reported the president, they called him the chief executive, called the need to solve the problems facing the world, including the Palestinian issue, through dialogue, the necessity for peace, and paying attention to the prophet's instructions. He said the Zionist regime was built on lies. They should hold a free referendum to establish a government based on the will of the Palestinian nation, including Jews, Christians, and Muslims. He further said, while this regime set up a large prison in the occupied territories of Palestine for the Muslim, Jewish, and Christian residents. In other words, he's recognizing that the Jews are not their enemies, the Jews. They're being held under a sort of prison. So that was his position, not to wipe out the Jews falsely attributed to him, because he spoke in person, he said it should disappear, because it's evil, not the concept of killing people. And he kept on stressing how he respects Jews. That's what he was telling us. And then he finished,
well, we didn't hear any of that in the media here.
This should be world news. And the most important statement, he said that the vigilant and just human beings will not blame the Jews for the crimes committed by the fake Zionist regime and its supporters in the occupied territories,
never heard that either.
Including genocide of defenseless and oppressed women and children. Don't blame the Jews. He's supposed to be the hero, according to Zionism, of all the enemies of Jewish people. And he's making a statement to the world, even if there's genocide of innocent people, don't blame the Jewish people.
And that's is that President?
Nobody reported this.
That's President Ahmadinejad.
President Ahmadinejad.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, and here we are. And this is Here and Now with Steve Struggle and myself, Dr. Abraham Weisfeld, in Montreal, Quebec. And
how y'all doing?
here we go.
All right.
So
How's everybody doing?
you have a couple of reports, I understand.
Yeah, I want to just send greetings out to everybody. Glad to be with you again, and hoping that everybody will please like and share and spread our broadcast. Remember that we're involved in active organizing. This isn't just a news report. I just want to say that. Yeah, well, our first report actually comes from Haiti. There is a report. I monitor the situation in Haiti for news that I do, and at this point, there's a strike of teachers. Teachers are on strike in Haiti. There's been a lot of money has been stolen by the schools against around the salaries of teachers, and there seems to be a lot of people who don't know about this. So the education system is in a real crisis. Since the assassination of Jovenel Moise in 2021, that's been 4 years, there's been real problem with the school systems. So in January of this year, Haitian teachers launched an indefinite general strike demanding payment of overdue salaries, improved working conditions, and better benefits. There was an agreement reached in January, but the government didn't keep its agreement, and the teachers went back on a strike in April. They want to make sure that many of the demands are common labor demands, health insurance, recognition of the contracts, and improvement of the working conditions and the school infrastructure. A lot of schools are closed in Haiti, or they've been moved to what is called inadequate facilities. Therefore, the schools can't really operate. Students are falling behind in their education. And the pass rate, Haiti has national exams. The pass rates has dropped below 30%, which is not good for any country. And parents and students are becoming more anxious, fearing for their futures, and the potential collapse of the academic infrastructure entirely. So schools have been closed for months. There's widespread closures. There's like people in the United States, you might not know this, Ibrahim, but in the United States, after COVID, there's a lot of talk about learning loss because of COVID, which I never bought, but people say it, okay? That because of COVID, there was learning loss. So this also is being discussed in Haiti, not because of COVID, because the schools are not properly financed, not properly structured. They don't have proper teachers. Teachers are going on strike for money, better conditions. So this is an impoverished country that got its name from its world recognition by being the first country in the Western Hemisphere to overthrow a colonial power, France. And France made Haiti, or somehow made Haiti, pay back money for their quote-unquote losses. So this is this is an example of what paying their money back to France does.
That's France colonialism.
Right, exactly. And I was one of the people to know that, when you hear about Haiti, you hear about so-called gangs, this kind of stuff. And people live in Haiti, though. They live a life. Like, they get up in the morning, they go to work, you know what I'm saying? They have kids, the kids go to school. It is a country with an infrastructure, be it crippled, be it suffering from social oppression and international economic domination. And the teachers there are pretty bold to be fighting back. You have the UN. The United States is funding a UN-backed police force of people from Kenya, which shows Kenya's role in promoting neo-colonialism. And they're trying to fight the so-called gangs, which is a complicated picture because everybody who's not for the system, remember this in Latin America especially, is called a gangster. You might be a social activist, you're a gangster or a terrorist. So, anybody, so the people in Kenya, the soldiers in Kenya are fighting Haitians who have got some beef with the government of some type. And now the teachers are fighting back. So I want people to know what's happening in Haiti, and just give them some solidarity. Look them up on Haiti Liberté newspaper. Haiti Liberté newspaper is a good newspaper to look at, and they need your support and solidarity. And they need you to follow the news there, because unless you look it up, you're not going to hear about it.
Yeah, I think that's pronounced Haiti Libertad, TAD.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm. And, here, in the news, the only thing that is ever heard about Haiti is that 60% of the capital city is controlled by what they say are gangs.
Right.
What these gangs are, I presume, is militias of young people who are trying to survive,
That's what they are.
But they only sort of, present it as, being a gang sort of, operation because they're trying to rationalize the intervention of foreign troops into Haiti.
Right, exactly. And also criminalize anybody who's not in line with the colonial setup, with the governments that set up. They're never elected. And if they were elected, let's say they were elections, in a situation like this, how could there really be free elections, considering that France, the United States, and other countries are the dominant interventionist force when it comes to politics and the economics? But if say you're not part of that clique or the classes that support the U.S., France, Brazil, other countries that have intervened in Haiti, then you're a terrorist or a gangster.
Yeah. Right. There's so much news, that basic, information of various countries that is not getting through. For instance, the opposition within the Zionist state is enormous. But it's not making into the regular news. They don't want to say anything, that threatens, the credibility of the continuation of the Zionist state. So they're not reporting the fact that the Haredi parties, the religious parties, which have been supporting Netanyahu's government in a coalition government in order to get their, subsidies, for their yeshivas, for the madrasas, their religious schools. So now this government that they've been supporting wants to pass a law conscripting, the Orthodox into the military because they don't have enough soldiers, willing to fight. They call up, 30,000 reserves and they get, like less than half showing up. Okay, so what are they going to do? Stop the war? No. They want to call up the Orthodox. And, they're calling up 30,000 Orthodox. And how many show up? 2,000. No way. And those 2,000, probably don't have anything else to do. So, the Haredi parties who are in this government coalition, and Netanyahu cannot continue as a government without their support because they are, much more substantial than the right-wing fascist, factions that are in the government of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Like the Haredis, they just support the government and they don't even ask, for positions in the cabinet. They're really naive. All they care about, is their schools and getting the subsidies, to pay for the students who need to live. So they said, if this law passes, then, well, first of all, they're not going to allow any such law to pass, because they're boycotting the Knesset, they're boycotting the parliament. So in the parliament, about half the seats are empty, and they can't pass any law because they can't get a majority. Okay, because the opposition, is supporting the conscription of the Orthodox as well, but they wouldn't have enough of support to pass the law. So they're not allowing them to pass a law to conscript the Haredi, who are exempt by law from serving in the military because they're not warmongers. They're just religious, and they don't want to do anything else but be religious. Okay, no, it's better than being a genocidal soldier, I would say, even if they're secular. Who cares whether or not they're secular? Who cares? Like so many leftists are sucked in, by this notion that the most progressive thing you can be is secular. Like secular, what does that mean? In France, it means you can't wear a hijab. That means the women can't wear a scarf over their hair because of modesty. And it means that, Jewish people can't wear a kippah in public, hair covering. But Christians, they can wear a little cross. Oh, yes, that's okay. That's what's called secularism. It's bullshit. So, that story is not making it into the news, that there's this opposition from the major supporters of the Netanyahu government. This can bring down the government, but nobody's mentioning this, except for Israeli English press, and I can show you this. Proof coming up. Okay, we're in the share here on my Facebook page. Yeah, I've got the story here.
All right.
IDF, the Imperial Death Force of the Zionist state, must issue draft orders to all eligible men by July, the Attorney General says. All right, good luck. If Torah learners are arrested, we won't be able to continue in this coalition, Haredi leaders told Ma'ariv, the newspaper. Means you're going to quit the government. The government's going to be brought down. Means new election. Means everything changes. Because they want to try to conscript. The Orthodox. No way. No how. Now, here is another sort of thing that's come out in Canada. About a dozen former Jewish school students who have become anti-Zionist are speaking out and did an interview with the Maple paper. Journal, 13 former students about the role Jewish students may play in Canadians joining the Israeli military. Because the Jewish schools, so-called Hebrew schools in Canada, that parents pay like $20,000, $24,000 a year for their children to be well-educated. Instead, they get brainwashed into becoming Zionists and in fact, volunteering to go and fight in the Zionist military. Completely, like ridiculous. Now, the boycott, the Haredi boycott over the government's delay in advancing a law that will exempt a majority of military-age Haredi men from IDF service. Okay. The government is supposed to be advocating a law that will exempt the Haredi of the Orthodox, from conscription. But it's not going ahead. And so the Haredi are boycotting the parliament, because they're not getting their exemption. And then the others, they want to pass a law conscripting them anyway and putting them into prison if they don't. Oh, well, it's not happening. If anything, that government's going to be finished. Now, this is a very important comment by Catherine Halper. And she is talking about how Zionism is creating anti-Semitism in the world and how she hates Zionism for that reason. She's got her own podcast. She does interviews with Aaron Mate as well. And she's, a great comrade. Yeah, and she talks about Yiddish too. I wonder if her parents were Bundists. She doesn't mention the Bund. That is, a lot of, like the Jewish opposition, they don't mention the Bund. Ever. Why? I don't know, because they think it's old-fashioned or something like that. Some sort of, sectarian reason. Or because they were, they're speaking to Marxists, and the Marxists will get upset if they mention the Bund.
I ran across something that really disturbed me that was critical of the Bund. I'm not going to talk about it right now. We'll talk off camera and we'll bring it on. But it was a story.
I'll talk about it. Like at the time that the Bund was debating with the communists, there was this guy Plekhanov from the Social Democrats, reformist, a revisionist, who was abandoned revolutionary struggle. This Plekhanov said that the Bund were Zundis who got seasick. In other words, they didn't want to travel over the sea. And he called Bundists, equivalent to Zionists. And that was an insult. And then there were other insults that came, from the communists, saying the Bundists, were reactionary because they wanted to preserve a national identity that was obsolete, et cetera, et cetera. All this kind of stuff. And who was fighting the fascists? The Bund. Right, while the communists made a deal with the Nazis, a non-aggression pact called the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. And then when the Bundists, had joined the Communist Party and, quit the Bund, they formed a Jewish anti-fascist committee, of course, because they knew it was dangerous, for the USSR. What happened to them? They got purged, put into prison, and then killed. And they were replaced, in the Jewish anti-fascist committee by Jewish communists who were never members of the Bund. And they continued on for a while there, until they too were purged and executed because it didn't go along, with the current sort of policy strategy of the regime. So, that's where it all goes. It's and even now, the Jewish Bund is only mentioned as a nostalgic historical reference for some to try to oppose Zionism, but they never talk about the Bund, coming back. They never talk about, what the Bund's program that was correct and should be continued. No, because they don't want to continue the Bund's program. What was that? That they want to continue that? What is the Bund's program that should continue that they don't want to continue? National cultural autonomy, because they don't want to, treat the Jewish people as a nation anymore. The Jewish people are not a Jewish people anymore, according to them. The Jewish people is just a religion that's obsolete, it should be forgotten about. And there's even, some Jewish academics like Shlomo Sand who cater to this notion of secularism in France. And they write a book, entitled that they resign from the Jewish people. Okay, good luck. Nobody else is going to believe that. And certainly the fascists don't. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I can't put my hand on it right now, but there was a report from a country. And the reason I'm mentioning this is the use of real not necessarily anti-Semitism, but excuse me, what word I'm looking for? The use of racism against the cultural autonomy movement in some countries.
Yeah.
When I find, I'm going to share with our audience, it's something we need to talk about. It's kind of a sensitive topic. Basically, that there are minorities, meaning the not majority population in countries, and the cultural autonomy centers are attacked politically because this is where the minorities congregate, or they have a historical and cultural affiliation to a center. It doesn't have to be a church or a mosque. It's a place where, let's say, the Tatars might congregate in a country, or the Kyrgyz, or the Iranians. You know, I'm just saying, but they're not in their native country. They have migrated to another country, and they find unity by being around their community people, which is what most people do, especially if you don't know the language and culture of the country where you go to. You'll find peace and solace among, quote unquote, your own people. That's what happens in the world. So I found it very troubling running across a story. Again, I'm not going to go too deep into who wrote the story, but it was basically saying that some corruption was found in the funding of these cultural autonomy centers. And we're happy to get rid of these centers and get rid of these people. And I just want people to know that the Trump's movement against the migrants, they haven't taken that tact yet in as far as attacking organizations, but eventually they might. But in some parts of the world, that's what the bigots and the racists do. They attack the organizations, the social cultural organizations. They attack the centers where people congregate, the libraries, the schools, not because there's anything wrong with the school or the library, the cultural center, but because of racism. And the anti-migrant movement that I see in Europe is racist. There's nothing to do with immigrants taking the jobs. We don't want these people here. And they make all kind of arguments, all kind of deceptive maneuvers politically. And I really hate to see it, because on some things I might agree with these people, on like the war in Ukraine, etc. I may agree with them. But when they come with this racist stuff, like in AFD in Germany, you see it coming out of Hungary, unfortunately. You see it coming out of many in Estonia. Always, everybody's got somebody to hate. Yeah. I find it interesting because we've talked, Abraham, that you mentioned the cultural autonomy. I was surprised to see this one article from a very prominent Telegram channel embracing the closing down of a cultural autonomy center in a country, and we have to get rid of them. It's always a cover for racism and bigotry. I want our listeners to be careful when you get involved in struggles. Don't be driven by racism or bigotry or a difference of religious views, because somebody is manipulating those ideas to make some money and to drive a wedge between you and people that can't be united. That's all I'm going to say about it. That's it. Yeah, it's terrible. So, and I appreciate you giving me leadership on this. You provide me leadership on this, and that's what got my attention. Oh wow, cultural autonomy. Let me look at this. And, ooh, they're against this cultural autonomy center because they don't want the people there anyway because they're racists.
Yeah, because national cultural autonomy means group of people, not individuals. Group. Right. And a group is much more powerful than a string of individuals, for sure.
Right, for sure. Yeah. Definitely. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Appreciate
you're so right. Because look at the United Nations. It's, got 194 states. Okay, but there's 3,000 nations in the world who are not majority in their own state. 3,000 against 194. Okay, so what does the United States do? In countries that are not their allies, they go in and they find a national minority and they offer them support. And they destabilize the regime until the regime, the government fails. And then they move in, and support, the opposition and then buy another election. That's how they operate. Okay.
So they operate. Yes. That's how they operate. Exactly.
So what does the left do? The left, when it comes to, an allied country, they will say, oh, well, everybody has to be loyal, to that progressive, government in that country. Okay. And national minorities, forget about, their own national cultural autonomy. they have to support the central government because the central government is progressive, and you don't support a progressive government, you're a reactionary. And if you support, national cultural autonomy and not the central government, then you are reactionary. That's as far as it goes. It's as simple as that. It's not so simple. I'll give you an example. Let's do a comparison between the Jewish Bund, for example, and what the left says about it and said about it in the past, and the Black Panther Party. Okay. Both are national minorities, both organized for self-defense. And if somebody said that the Black Panther Party should not exist because the left is going to come along and support, the black people and defend them against, the white racists. Are the black people going to accept that? No way, because they haven't come to support them in the past.
They haven't shown them. They haven't shown up since the Civil War.
Yeah, and okay, some volunteers went down, to the South, during the civil rights, campaign. Some communists and some Jewish people went down there and they got killed. Okay, so they supported, the Black Nation's liberation struggle. Right. But did the unions, the white unions, the working class support?
No.
The Black liberation struggle? No. Okay, so that means Black liberation struggle has to support itself with, solidarity, with solidarists, Okay, fine, but they have to support themselves, defend themselves. And that's what the Jewish people did. They supported themselves and defended themselves successfully against the fascists under the Russian Tsar. And in the 1905 revolution, who was fighting back the fascists and the police in the streets? The Jewish Bund. The communists weren't around. The Jewish Bund was 35,000 members. The communists were 8,500. They didn't have the strength. The Jewish Bund did because of collective solidarity, fostered by national cultural autonomy. Okay, so to say that that's reactionary would be utterly stupid. And it's not, said, the leftists don't say that about 1905. No. But when it comes to nowadays, what do they call on Jewish people to do in order to become anti-Zionist? They have to give up being Jewish. Good luck. A lot of Jewish people have tried to give up being Jewish in Germany in particular. They were assimilationists. They said, oh, we're German, we're not Jewish, and along come the 1933 Nuremberg regulations, which said that even if you have one Jewish grandparent, you are Jewish and therefore not German, and therefore you could be excluded and done away with. And they would always say, oh, but we're German, we're assimilated, sure, you're assimilated, but that doesn't mean you get that exemption from the fascists. No way, no how. So a national minority has to defend itself. That's what national cultural autonomy means. And it means, supporting the Black Panther Party, and it means supporting the Jewish Bund. Same thing. Yeah. Okay, those are the important points to be made today. And I think that we're under 1 hour, so we can get it into TikTok as well. We're doing quite well on all the various platforms. We're in Reddit Jewish Bund group. We're in Reddit Democracy group. We're in on TikTok. We're in Telegram. We're in what's the other one called? Interview. We're of course in Facebook. And on YouTube, of course, and all those different platforms give us a total of a couple of 100, listeners. So we've got a core of organizers, political theorists, who want to know how to proceed. They want to hear the repetition of what they're hearing, on the regular sort of, journalists, like that.
Very true. How do you proceed? What do we do? Right. Good point.
What do we do? What's to be done, basically, as Lenin said.
That's what's to be done. That's a good point. What's to be done? That's very good.
Yeah. And here we are. We know what we're doing. We've got the experience and we're talking about it. And we've got the listeners, who are learning from us. So on we go. And here we go for today. Thanking you very much for your attention, everyone. And we will be speaking to you again in the following week.